We started a new series a couple of weeks ago on the Kabbalah. First week was an introduction. Last week we began with some of the concepts. Today we're continuing. And next week will be the third part, dealing with the various concepts. Some of these concepts are difficult, so you'll have to bear with me. I spent many hours, trying to simplify all of this to make it as understandable as possible. What's going to be different next week, however, is in some ways it's going to be very interesting, because we're going to talk more about the various worlds that exist, the various creatures, the various things that were created, the angels, and so forth. So next week is a little bit easier to follow. But nevertheless, it's all part of the concepts. In order to understand what Kabbalah is all about, we have to deal with the mechanisms of how this world was created. And after we finish the concepts, we'll talk more about the various ideas that are closer to us, like love, as one example. How is that understood according to the Kabbalah? We'll also speak about the 22 letters of the alphabet, things that are a little bit easier to follow. Nevertheless, they're based on the Kabbalah. I just want to review some of what we said last week. The tachlit habriyah, the purpose of creation, was lehetiv. God wanted to bestow upon us His goodness, His kindness, and the entire creation is therefore a manifestation of His goodness, His kindness. But it's not just a manifestation, it contains within it the vessels that are necessary for us to receive all that kindness, all that goodness. We spoke about tzimtzum. In order to be able to create the vessels to receive all that light, all that goodness, there's something called tzimtzum, where Hashem needed to constrict all that light that enveloped the entire universe, the entire yikum, and created a vacuum in where all the galaxies, the universe as we know it, were created. This needed to happen. This area needed to be constricted, or the light that was all over the world needed to be removed temporarily from there, because it would have been too much. Imagine somebody who's in the dark, in a cave, coming out to the light. It's just too much light for the physical eyes to handle. Mashiach's arrival is also compared to a very immense light. And because it's so immense, it will have to be gradual. We will have to become accustomed to it. Slowly but surely we will see things that are happening, and it will make more and more sense as it becomes closer and closer. And we're holding at that point, B'ezrat Hashem. So because of this tremendous amount of light, even though it's not real physical light, we nevertheless use the term light because we want to understand what the Kabbalah is talking about. Because of the intensity of this light, Hashem needed to remove some of it in order to create this vacuum, this halal. And after that halal, or that vacuum is created, He goes back and through a thin kav of light, imagine like a laser light, reinserts His hanhagot, as we call them, the Sephirot. He reintroduces that light in a very filtered way. Filtered so the world can handle it. We spoke about Nahamad Kisufa, I believe, the bread of shame. Did we mention that briefly? And that is that the tzimtzum created the vessels to receive the good. But in order for the good to be complete, it needs to be earned. So the vessels to earn the good are the mitzvot. By fulfilling the mitzvot, we earn the good, and it's no longer bread of shame. Bread of shame meaning something that we receive for free. Were we to receive all that goodness for free, that tov would be pagum. It would be defective. It wouldn't be complete. It is complete when we actually work for it, when we earn it. Then we really feel good about it. Then it becomes a part of us. So Hashem creates the vessels or the medium to achieve or to acquire that good. And one way is through the mitzvot. In speaking about these vessels, the vessels that are necessary to acquire this good, in order for the good not to be defective, in order for the good to be complete. What comes to mind is the mitzvah of tzedakah. Whoever learns the halachot of tzedakah will see that there are various levels of giving charity. One of the highest levels is something called matan baseter, when you give charity anonymously. Because what happens when you give it anonymously? You accomplish two things. You spare the poor man shame, the busha, and you don't have an opportunity to be mitgaet, to become arrogant, to take credit for having helped a certain individual. That is why matan baseter is a very powerful form of tzedakah. It doesn't mean that at all times one should do charitable acts anonymously. People should see that you are a good example. You should take the lead, perhaps, and in a major appeal, raise your hand so that others should follow. Depending on the circumstances, one may want at times to be anonymous and at other times not to be anonymous. Depending on what you're dealing with. If we're dealing with a poor man specifically, then obviously if you can find a way to give him what he needs without him knowing who he got it from and without you knowing who you gave it to, that is a higher form of tzedakah. Because you are saving this individual the shame. Therefore the tzedakah that is being performed is more complete. We spoke about the Sephirot. The Sephirot is that system where Hashem filters down His good. And these Sephirot are anhagot. They are the way He manages the world. The world is managed from the upper worlds to the lower worlds. And you have therefore Sephirot that begin in a very spiritual realm. And they go down, and mishtalshelot, they go down. And they evolve up until the point where they reach our world, which is the Olam HaChomer, Olam HaGashmi, the more material, the more physical world. Regardless, all of these Hanhagot, or Sephirot as they are called, they are activated in the entire universe. But each one is represented in a different part, in a different plane, in a different dimension, if we can call it so. And they all represent the Hanhagot, the various either emanations, attributes of the Almighty, and how He conducts, if we can call it, His affairs in this world. Judgment, mercy, and there were 10 of them, as we mentioned last week. The more a Sephirah is in the higher world, the more it is spiritual, and the more it is hidden from us, and the less, therefore, we understand about it. For example, the upper Sephirot, Keter, Chochmah, Binah, there's very little that we know about them, except that they have more to do with chesed, with kindness. They're not mitzumsamim yet. They have not been restricted yet through judgment. As I explained last week, all this good has to be limited. The world cannot exist just with good. And it has to be earned too. So there has to be a system in place that will control when does good come down, when it is held back, and so forth. This light, as it comes down from the upper worlds, it becomes more megusham. It becomes more physical. And perhaps we'll explain a little bit more next week that a form, one of the forms of this light or of this shefa, of this tov, is rain, parnasa. It is something that we benefit from, but it's something physical. So depending on which olam we're in, and I'll explain the various olamot next week, depending on which olam you are, these manifestations of good are manifested in a different way. In this world, they're manifested as something physical that we can touch and we can sense and we can see that this is good. Even though this world is more physical, it does not mean that there are no spiritual beings here. It is true that the higher the world, the higher the Sephirot, the more spiritual they are, but even as they tend to come down here, there is still something spiritual in this world. The one that we're most familiar with is our neshama. The neshama is down here. Nevertheless, it is something spiritual. What all these Sephirot have in common is that they manifest the anhaga, the conduct or the divinity of the Almighty in creation, on condition that we pay attention. If one opens his eyes, then he's able to see, he's able to observe this anhaga on his level. Because our minds are limited, we cannot see everything, but if we do observe, the rabbis actually encourage us to do that, to not just have a simple emunah, but to strengthen that emunah, that faith, by doing what Abraham Avinu did, by but going out and observing and seeing. How beautiful. Look at the harmony. Look at the beauty. Everything works so nicely. And if one does that, if one observes that, then it's just simple. He will come to the realization that there is a captain to the ship. There is someone in charge. There is someone who designed all of this and who put it together. Those who deny it, either because they are not paying attention, they're not observing, or they choose simply to ignore it because they're afraid of what the consequences will be by accepting something like that. And they'd rather ascribe to philosophies like the Big Bang. It all happened by itself. But all it takes is observation. The rabbis tell us, simple observation. And everybody has it within him. Hashem, as I'll explain later on, Hashem put it into the creation, into everyone, through his neshama, which is a chelek elokah mimal, a part of God, to be able to experience this. And when a Jew is chozer b'tshuva, when he returns to his roots, what is happening in him is that spark of divinity is lit and is awakened by something or someone who helped him awaken, and he's able to all of a sudden experience something that he did not experience before. I'm sure many of you perhaps may have seen such individuals who have begun to cry all of a sudden at the Kotel HaMaravi, at the Western Wall. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, why are you crying? And this is somebody who's not observant, who's very distant from Judaism. There is just something that triggered his neshama to turn on. Because we all have a neshama. And as I will explain later, the problem is that the neshama is being limited to, is being constricted by something called the body. And that is why we are not always aware of certain things. So if we take the time, if we observe, if we look out, which will lead to another subject that we will talk about another time, something called meditation. Meditation, or as we call it in Hebrew, hitbonenut, is something which the Hasidut is very strong. And kavanot, the kavanot that we have in the prayers that we say is also part of that, also has a great deal to do with strengthening one's emunah and making one continuously aware, not just once a year, on Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah, but continuously aware on a day-to-day basis of the presence of Hashem in the world and of the tachlit of our purpose. And that is why we're reminded to kiss the mezuzah when we leave the home, when we enter the home, to see the name of Hashem on the outside of the parchment, Shin Dalet Yud, which I'll speak about later on. There are many things that we do, things that are not even written in the Torah, that the rabbis encouraged us and advised us, so in order for us to remember, so we do not forget, what are we doing here? What is the creation all about? Why did Hashem put us here to begin with? Why does He need us? He doesn't need us. So what's the purpose of all of this? And there are many questions. Why is there evil in the world? That Hashem will cover next week. I thought I was going to cover that today, but just too much information. But there's a reason for that too, and that was created too. So if one wants to understand these things, obviously he first needs to begin by asking questions. And then finding out the answers, of course, he needs a little bit of direction for that, who to turn to, what books to read. But the first step is to observe and to ask. And by doing so, one is able to strengthen his emunah. When we spoke about the Sephirot, I told you that there were two types in the Kabbalah, two configurations, we can call them, or two structures, or two designs maybe. One is through circles, through spheres, and one is through columns. Straight columns, columns in an angle, horizontal and vertical. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this vertical or horizontal type of columns and what the significance of it. Each one of those designs has a different idea behind it. When we're dealing with the structure of the Sephirot in columns, whether vertical, horizontal, or in an angle, what we're seeing is structure, organization, and direction. In other words, it's not something haphazard, it's not something that has no design and no plan. When one is above the other, there's a reason why one is above the other. One leads to the other. The one at the bottom depends on the one on top. In other words, there's a connection. And the best example of connection or link between the Sephirot, for example, on a horizontal column, or in an angle, is what we spoke about last week, that there's something called Rahamim. You have, on the one hand, you have Chesed, which is the ultimate good, but you have that Chesed, that good, being restricted on the other side by din, by judgment. So you have something in between them called Rahamim that makes a compromise between the two, a connection. So that's the link. They're all interconnected. So that design of Sephirot shows structure, it shows connectivity, and it shows direction of where everything is going, what the original plan is, and where it's headed. And where is it headed? It's headed from the Ratzon HaEloki, from the original will of Hashem to create this world, to the bottom Sephirah called Malchut, where Hashem wants to reign over the world. And you cannot have a king without having servants, without having Mivrahim, those that are created. So that is the ultimate result of what is intended here. This structure, or this design, called Yosher, straight columns, is also called Tselem Elokim. And I may have mentioned a little bit last week about the fact that in the very beginning, in Pashat Bereshit, when man is created, it says, Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu. Hashem is speaking with the angels and saying, let us make man. And it's a very difficult verse to understand. We know that Hashem doesn't have to ask anybody permission. And what is b'tzalmenu kidmutenu? If you translate it literally, it means in our form. Hashem has no physical form. There's nothing like him. And there are various interpretations of what b'tzalmenu kidmutenu means. One, as brought down by the commentaries, is the koach, the power, the ability, lehavinu lehaskil. The human being is not like an animal. He has the ability to think. He has an intellect. He also has something called a neshama. He also has the power of speech. He's a totally different type of creation. And that is why he was created towards the very end, created by himself, not together with the animals. Something unique. But Tzalmenu also means the Tzelem Elokim. There is a Tzelem Elokim. There is some design upstairs. What design are we talking about? We're talking about the design of the Sephirot. This Sephirot, especially the one with Yosher, with the columns, that design is called the Tzelem Elokim. That shows the Ishtalshelut. That shows how the various attributes of Hashem come down in various directions. And in the same way that structure or that design shows that about Hashem, that is also true about the human being himself. In the guf, in the body, and in the neshama of the human being, you have that Tzelem Elokim. You have that configuration. And as we said last week, the Sephirot, with this design, look like a human being. You have the head, the two arms, the two legs, right? You have that look. But it's not only that look, it's what's in the guf and what's in the neshama. The number of organs. Let me give you an example. I don't think anybody has thought about it, but why is it that we have many sets of twos? We have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, 2 arms, 2 feet. There's a lot of sets of twos. What does that show? These happen to be, 2 happen to be on 2 sides. So you have right and left. Just like you have in the Sephirot, right and left, you have in the human body, and in the organs, and in the Shema, you have these concepts of right and left. What does right and left represent? It represents Zachar and Nekeva, male and female. Also a set of 2. It also represents Chesed and Din, the 2 attributes of unlimited good and kindness, and Din, judgment. Now look further into creation, further, in other words, beyond the human body, and you will see additional sets of 2s. Yom V'Layla, day and night. Tov V'Ra, good and evil. Neshama and Guf, the spirit and the body. Why are we seeing here sets? Or why are there 2? What's the symbolism behind these 2? Several ideas. One, in the Kabbalah, we see that there are certain things that are davar v'hipucho. You have something and you have its opposite. You have, as an example of davar v'hipucho, you have the kedusha and the tum'ah. The holy sparks, what's divine, and the tum'ah, which is against that which is divine, which we'll speak about next week. Another name for the Tumah is the Sitra Hara, the other side.
How about Israel and the nations, Rabbi?
Israel and the nations, sure. Yeah. So you have something and its opposite counterpart. You have also something shemashlim et hasheni, one that complements or fixes or completes the other. So they need each other too. And yeah.
Klipat Noga fit into that also?
Yeah, Klipat Noga, maybe we'll talk about it. That's next week.
All right.
And then you have something called Koach HaMashpia, the Koach HaMekabel, the force in creation which gives and the force which receives. Again, Zachar v'Nekeva fits into that too, male and female. The male gives, the female receives. That is just the way creation works. You have many parts in creation that are giving and there are others that are taking. And I once explained that perhaps that is one of the ideas behind the prohibition of the mixture of milk and meat. Milk in the Kabbalah is a koach of shefa, of being mashpia. The cow gives, milk nourishes. It's that power, it's that force, that energy. Where the basar, the flesh, is something more of a mekabel, of receiving. And maybe there's something wrong with mixing these two concepts. But anyway, all of this exists in creation in many areas, in many ways. The upper Sephirot really have more to do with Olam Haba. And that's why there's no real need to go into them. They don't apply too much to this world. And because they're Olam Haba, we don't know too much about them. As I said earlier, they're very spiritual. And the more spiritual something is, the less we know about it. But the bottom 7 are directly involved or directly affects us in Olam Hazeh. And because they are 7, well, guess what? That is why you have Sheva Kochavei Lechet. That is why you have the 7 planets. The main planets. We're not including Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and all that, which have a purpose too. But the main ones have always been in astronomy and in astrology, the 7. So you have 7. What else do we have 7? We have 7 gates in the head, which we'll talk a little bit more about next week. Why 7? What these gates are all about. But we have the 2 eyes. We have the 2 nostrils. That's 4. We have the 2 ears, right, and the mouth. So we have 7. What else do we have 7? We have the 7 Reki'im, 7 heavens. We have 7 days of the week. We have 7 years that make a Shemitah. And there's many sets of 7. 7 is a very special number. But these 7 Sephirot, the bottom ones, the 7 of the 10, have something to do with Olam Hazeh. And that is why they are represented in many ways as groups of 7. Now we come to a difficult concept that is more elaborated in the Kabbalah of the Ari, I believe. That is something called the Parfim. I think most of you already know or have an idea of how the Sephirot function and what they are. But just in case you want to know more about Kabbalah, that is why I'm introducing this concept as well. Partzuf. Partzuf literally means a face. And what this means is that there are certain Sephirot that either on their own or together with a few other Sephirot as a group, they act as a single unit. And when they act as a single unit, instead of as individual Sephirot, they have in them the entire 10 Sephirot. In other words, it's a different kind of a configuration. A Partzuf is a face which includes in it all the 10 Sephirot. And it acts as a single unit. And when it acts as a single unit, it shows a certain face in the various worlds, of which I will talk about next week. There are various worlds, and depending on which world this face is showing itself, it's manifested differently. Why is it called a face? Because the Kabbalah says the face of a human being is the chitzoniyut. It's the outer shell. Nevertheless, it shows or it tells you a lot about what's going on inside this human being. You can tell by the visage, by the countenance, by the appearance of the face of the outside, what is going on in this inside of this human being, of this individual. There's a lot that you can tell. We can't see everything, but there's a lot that you can tell by just seeing or by just looking at the outside. A החיצוניות מגלה מהפנימיות. The outside shows or reveals a little bit of the nature of what's going on in this individual. In the same way, the parzuf shows a panim, it shows a face. In other words, it reveals something that is going on. Something of the inside that is going on is being manifested or revealed on the outside. So there's various units like that are called parzufim, that have this configuration of all the Sephirot. And I'll mention 5 of the most famous ones, the ones that are mostly talked about in the Kabbalah. One of the first ones that are mentioned is the parzuf called Erech Anpin. In Aramaic it's called Erech Anpin, long face. In Hebrew it would be called Erech Afayim. This is one Sephirah. It's the Sephirah of Keter. It's the highest Sephirah, that when it acts as a full unit in that configuration, including all the Sephirot, it appears as Erech Anpin. The midah of Erech Anpin is complete chesed, and it always works towards achieving shlemut, completion, and striving towards completion till the end of the world. In other words, until the Ra, all the evil, is eradicated. It is continuously going in that direction of shlemut and of tov. And that's why it is called Erech Apayim. Erech meaning also that it waits, it's patient. It will take a long time until all the good work that the tzaddikim has done will be repaid. And in the eventuality, all the evil that was done by the Reshaim will also be taken care of. In other words, it takes its time. But in the end, that's where it's headed. It's headed towards shlemut, until the Ra is completely removed. I'm just giving you a brief description because these are very difficult concepts to understand, how they interact and what they do. But they have a parzuf, meaning that they manifest themselves in a certain way. From Chokhmah Ubina, we have another parzuf, 2 parzufim actually, called Abba ve'Ima. Abba ve'Ima means father and mother. The reason why they're called that is because they take what they receive from above them and they give birth to that which is below them. What does that mean, they give birth? They're the ones that are in charge of the bottom Sephirot in a sense. And the bottom Sephirot have to do with mishpat. They are the ones that restrict all this good. You don't get it unless you deserve it. Right? So they are the ones that handle this, the changeover from the good to the restricted good that comes only with mishpat. They are the ones that make the rules. And they are the ones that are responsible for bringing down this goodness to those who deserve it. So that's why they're called Abba ve'Ima. In other words, they are the ones that give birth. The bottom 6 Sephirot, what do we have? We have Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. The bottom 6, they are called Ze'er Anpin. Ze'er Anpin in Aramaic means the small face. The small face means it's still Chesed, but it's less Chesed. These 6, as a parzuf, manifest themselves when there is evil in the world. Because there is evil in the world, because they act as a system of mishpat. And they're called Hanhagat HaMishpat. They act as justice in making order here, some order in the universe. For example, let me give you 2 small examples. Tzaddik Beralo and Rasha Betovlo. I'm sure many of you have heard of these ideas. Why is it that sometimes the righteous suffer and those who are evil seem to prosper and get away with it? And that really has to do a little bit with the Sephirot of Netzach and Hod. Because there is mishpat here. Mishpat meaning judgment. And what does judgment say? Well, there's 2 kinds of judgment, at least 2 here. One, saying as follows: well, this tzaddik is such a good man. He's a great man. He does mitzvot. But he did an avirah or 2 when he was a young man, before he became a Baal Teshuvah. Instead of him paying for this, when he passes, when he departs from this world, Hashem says, you know what? I'll do a chesed with him. I'm going to cleanse him down here. He's going to have many bills, perhaps a lawsuit or 2, trouble with his neighbors, some accident here and there, and everybody will wonder why. He's such a good man. The bad that is happening to him, is that bad? No, it's really good. So the Sephirah here of Netzach is good being manifested or giving the appearance that it's bad, but in reality the pnimiyut, the essence of this manifestation of bad is really good, because this is for his good. Now let's take a look at the other one. Rasha vetovlo. He's Rasha. Everything about him is Rasha. But when he was bar mitzvah, he put on tefillin. Or he did some tzedakah. He did something good. Hashem says, but this guy is a complete Rasha. I want to pay him in this world the little bit that is coming to him, so he doesn't get anything in Olam Haba. So the little bit good that he gets here, it appears as good, but is it really good? No, in reality it's din. It's not chesed. Even though it has the appearance of good, the essence of it is din. He's getting it here because Hashem wants to pay him off for it. So is that good or not? It's not really good, but it has the appearance of good. So some things have the appearance on the outside, but they're not really what we see. Right? What do the rabbis tell us? Al tistakil bakankan ela b'ma sheyesh bo. In other words, when you're dealing with people, don't look at the outer shell. Check him out. Appearances, exterior appearances are misleading. They say the grass is greener on the other side. Yeah, but you don't know what problems he or she is having. Some things appear nice, but they may not be so nice. In the end, in the eventuality, we must remember, nothing evil comes down from above. Because Hashem is only good. So what's all this that is happening to us, to Am Yisrael, or to us as individuals? It's din. It has to do with the mishpat. It has to do with some cheshbon. Either because of something that happened in this lifetime, or because something that happened in a different lifetime, which we'll talk about another time, called Gilgul, which has to do with something called Olam HaTikun. The bottom Sephirah called Malchut is called Nukva, as a Partuf. Nukva means Nekeva, female, because it receives all the Shefa that comes from above, and it works to balance what is due to human beings and what is not due. In other words, it determines how much they will receive and how much they will not receive. It's like a valve. It shuts down when they don't deserve it. It opens up when they deserve it. So this Parsuf manifests itself as the shoresh, as the root behind the one who's in charge of controlling the shefa that's coming down. How much to give, when not to give, and so forth. Okay, quick example is when there is a famine in the world. Why is there famine? What does that have to do with it? It has to do with that manifestation of that Parsuf perhaps, or others, restricting the shefa from coming down. When I speak about Ain Hara, I touch a little bit on this too. Because what is an Ain Hara? We don't fully understand it, but what it has to do with is an evil eye that is interfering with the shefa that's coming down. Because this shefa, this abundance, this good, whether it's the physical body that feels good one moment, and the other moment it just doesn't feel good. It begins to vomit. What's going on? Didn't eat anything. But there's something that we understand called the immune system. We can identify with the immune system. But there's also a spiritual immune system. If the neshama is healthy, then the body will be healthy. And therefore the body will be immune from certain elements, let's call them. Not from catching a cold. You have to dress yourself properly. But you will be immune from Ain Hara under the right conditions. But if you're exposed, you may be affected. And that Ain Hara is able to interfere momentarily with that shefa that's coming down. It cuts it off. It's like you're not getting anything anymore. All of a sudden you feel what's going on. And it interferes in people's lives in more than one way. Not just physically. It can affect their parnassah. It can even kill them. That's how powerful Ain Hara is. The rabbis tell us that 99% of people die from an Ain Hara. What does that mean? Because in the end, everybody dies. Yeah, but what is the straw that breaks the camel's back? In other words, what is the one that does it? It's very possible an Ain Hara. But we don't have to be that concerned with it, as long as we're not around these kind of people. And in case you're ever affected, well, there is something that you can do to remove it. So it's not the end of the world. But unfortunately, there are people with an evil eye. And these evil eyes tend to interfere, tend to cause damage and harm people in more than one way. Just like people can harm others physically, they can harm them with their evil eye, which is really another way of describing somebody who is envious of you or looks at you in a negative way. They may or may not. It doesn't mean that everybody who is envious has an evil eye. An evil eye is as follows. Somebody that is not jealous, because jealous means they want what you have for themselves. Somebody that has an evil eye says, I don't want him to have what he has. I don't care if I don't have it. I don't want him or her to have what they have. That's the idea behind an evil eye. And what's the power behind it? According to the Zohar, there is a certain mal'ach, that as soon as this person sees someone else, this mal'ach, which is destructive, zooms in, as we say in English, into that individual, if that individual is looking at this person, and that is how they're able to make them ill or affect them with an ayin hara. In any event, what happens in this process is that the shefa, or some of that shefa, is interrupted, and that is why people feel all of a sudden that they're either in pain or that something is not right. The last partsuf that I'm going to talk about is something called atika kadisha, and that is a partsuf. It's a very different kind of a partsuf. It's something which we have very little understanding about, because it's in the upper worlds. There's a world that we'll talk about next week called Olam Kadmon. And in Olam Kadmon there are also Sephirot. The bottom Sephirah of Olam Kadmon is the Malchut of that world. The bottom Sephirah of an upper world always sits as a crown on the world right beneath it. That's just something for you to know. Now, in this particular place, Atika Kadisha, which is a partsuf, which is a face, happens to be the hibur, the link between the sechar, the reward that Hashem is planning and preparing to give us, whether it's in Olam Hazeh or in Olam Haba. It's the connection between that reward and the world that we live and work in. That's the connection. Atika Kadisha is therefore the connection between the two worlds. Now, what happens in that manifestation of that partsuf? What is going on in that partsuf? Things that we don't need to know, and things that sometimes we shouldn't know. For example, in Atika Kadisha, it is decided what job each and every one of you is going to have in this world. What's going to be your specific tafkid? What's wrong with knowing that? Well, the Kabbalah teaches that sometimes it's not a good idea to know everything, because if you know everything, then you are limiting yourself. Plus, you might leave this world earlier than you should have, because you finished, because you knew what to do. You focused only on that. You didn't focus on anything else. So it's better not to know. There are certain things that are better not to know. And one of them is your specific tafkid. I mean, we may have an idea because the neshama draws us in a certain direction. So obviously Hashem wants us to be led to what we need to do, to what we need to accomplish, because we need to focus, concentrate on that. We need to emphasize certain mitzvot because maybe that's for our tikkun. Yeah, but it's not a good idea to have too much clarity, because then we will be limiting ourselves and not doing other things that Hashem wants us to do too. So in this partsuf, what is being manifested is the entire plan of who gets what, and what do we give him in order to achieve that. He needs to achieve something, so we're going to give him parnasa, a lot of money, because he has to achieve. His tafkid will be to build yeshivot, to give a lot of tzedakah. So in order for him to achieve that, what do we give him? Do we give him long life? Do we give him parnasa? Do we give him health? That is being decided there. And if we were to become aware of it, it would also interfere with our free will. So therefore, that's a realm or an aspect, a part of this olam that we don't have too much information about. What they also decide there in this realm is how much sechar, how much reward will there be for this mitzvah. Kibud abayim, how much do you get for kibud abayim? How much do you get for tzedakah? How much do you get for prayer? Imagine if you were to know that. As the Midrash says, there was once a king who had a beautiful big orchard of many fruit trees, and he hired some workers to pick the fruits, and at the end of the day he paid. But everybody was wondering why he paid for the tangerines a different price than he paid for the mangoes.
and for the pineapples. He paid so much more for the tangerines. It's just my example. So the workers told the king, had you told us that you pay $5 an hour for tangerines and $2 for the mango, we would have all wanted to work at the tangerines. The king says, that's exactly why I didn't tell you. I want all the fruits to be picked. I want the entire field to be picked. I don't want to tell you what I'm going to pay for what. Because then you would only work on that which pays more. The same here. Hashem, of course, decides, and there's a system that determines how much sechar will go for a particular maaseh, for a particular mitzvah. And that's something that we don't know about. But that is what happens in Atika Kadisha. Just a few more concepts. Speaking about the Sephirot, we must remember that the Sephirot act as vessels. Vessels that receive the light. Now, when vessels receive the light, there's only so much light that they can receive. That is why there's something called or pnimi, the or mekif. A vessel that receives the light, and the light stays inside, that light that stays inside is called or pnimi, the inner light. That light which can no longer enter is called or mekif. It surrounds, it doesn't go away. It's still chofif. It's still standing on the outside, because maybe one day it will be able to enter. This is the basic idea behind the two concepts of or nimi and or mekif. Now, how does that help us? What does that have to do with anything? Well, it has a direct connection to guf and neshama. Because in the same way that a keli, a vessel, restricts the amount of light that it contains, and it can't allow any more, the body restricts the neshama, or limits the neshama. The neshama acts as a light in the body. But it's restricted. It cannot fully express itself. It cannot fully do what it would really love to do by its essence, by its nature. It's divine. It only wants to do good. Then why don't we have more people doing good? Because their gufot, their bodies, the physical body is restricting them, limiting them, and not allowing the neshama to express itself. However, even though the neshama is limited within the body, the neshama's function within the body is to refine it, lezakechota, to purify it. What happens when the neshama is able to purify the body very, very much? The body becomes more purified, and it is able to draw in other parts of the neshama. Eventually, when we talk about neshamot, we'll talk about the various levels. Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. When a Jew elevates himself, he purifies his body, he reaches a certain madriga, he's able to take in more light, more parts of the neshama. You may have heard, for example, in English there's something called the astral body, or the aura. They have different names of a certain light that surrounds the physical body. There's many things out there that are not necessarily coming in, but for some reason stay on the outside. It is possible, when a Jew purifies his physical body, to take in more of what is outside, plus the fact that when the body becomes so purified, it doesn't rot in the grave. That is why you have tzaddikim. You have certain individuals that because of some good deed that they have done, after many, many years, you open up the grave, and they're still complete, intact, as though they passed away today. The neshama has the power to purify the body, and really that's what it should do. And when it does, it allows more light to enter. In the same way that the vessels, the light within the vessels, even though they're limited, that light, me'adin, it purifies the vessel, and when it purifies the vessel, it takes away some of its limitations, and little by little it allows more to go in. How is this reflected in the olam of the avodah, of our, in other words, of work, of conduct? The orach nimi, the inner light, is that which we're conscious about. It's the driving force behind our conduct. We behave ourselves in a certain way because we are being led in a certain way. That's the orach nimi, something that we can identify with. It's something that we are aware of. It's a certain awareness. And we lead ourselves based on that awareness. The or hamekif is the ultimate potential that is lying out there, that the neshama is, or the human being, the individual, is not always aware of. You know what? You have so much potential, and where is all this potential? It's outside. It's a little bit distant. You can't see it. So how do you know about it? Hashem puts it into the neshama to strive, that one should perfect himself, one should strive, and that is what we call ambition. Some people are more ambitious than others by nature, but in reality that's what the neshama has, is that ambition to perfect itself, to grow. So we're not aware of all that potential that is out there, but everybody has a tremendous potential. Psychologists like to talk about it a little bit differently. They say people do not take advantage of their full brain potential. Okay, I'm not just talking about brains. I'm talking about more about the spiritual potential, the great levels that every human being, no matter how low he is right now, how much potential he really has, that he is not really aware of. When one, of course, slowly but surely purifies himself, learns Torah, and strives to grow, then there's a chance that he will get there. I remember when I was in yeshiva, the Rosh Yeshiva said, strive to reach to the highest peaks possible. Because even though you may think that that's impossible, but if you plan on getting to a place that's lower, that's as far as you will go. Aim for the highest. And even if you aim for the highest, even if you get to a little place which is a little bit lower, at least you've gotten there. You would not have gotten there had you not aimed for the highest. So that or mekif, which is on the outside, is the potential that everybody has that he needs to tap into by speaking to his neshama, by limiting the physical body, which will allow the neshama to express itself more fully. The names of Hashem, there are many names of Hashem. I'll be very brief about that. What the names have to do with is the bechinot, the various aspects of Hashem's conduct, of how he manifests himself and how he does things in this world. One name that I will talk about is Shin Dalet Yud, Shakai, which has to do with a little bit with the idea of tzimtzum, because the name Shakai, or Shadai, means to limit. The universe would expand and continue to expand if Hashem would not have said stop. So that name has to do with tzimtzum, with limiting, with not allowing expansion to continue on. Same thing with the ocean. Hashem has put a limit up until where the waters can go. When that limit is gone, you have tidal waves and you have major floods. But otherwise, Hashem puts certain limits up until where things can go. You have this name of Hashem also manifested in miracles. There are different kinds of miracles. Some that are open, obvious, and some that are hidden, concealed. This name, when it's involved in a miracle, it tends to conceal it. Or the miracle, using this name, or when this name is employed, tends to conceal the miracle. And there are many things that happen with us every day where we're unaware of. We chose one day to go through this street, to drive through this block, instead of our usual way. And we don't know what would have happened had we gone through the other way, because we never found out. Many things that we don't realize, that is being concealed. And this particular name also has to do with the fact that all of creation, all the creatures, regardless of their spiritual level, can have access to Hashem. With everyone, Hashem has made it so that everything in creation has the ability to access or to become aware of the divinity of Hashem, of the Elokut. It's this name that allows that to happen. That's the power behind this name, that it gives everything in this world the ability, no matter on what spiritual level they are, to be able to relate. So there's no excuse. No matter how low this man is, how distant he or she is, they have that ability. They have something in them that will allow them access and allow them to become aware of Hashem. Last but not least, we have the Igulim, all the spheres in the world. Why is everything round? Saturn is round, the rings around Saturn is round, Jupiter is round, the moon is round, the planets are round, many things are round, the eyes are round. This roundness has several ideas behind it. One may be also the tzimtzum, because when the tzimtzum occurred, it occurred the ofen shaveh. Means everything was equal from all corners. A circle, there's no end and there's no beginning, and everything is perfectly symmetrical. In other words, when tzimtzum occurred, everything in the world was equally metzumtzam. Everything was restricted equally. It was not like there was more here, less there. The tzimtzum shows, or the circle shows a certain symmetry, a certain beauty, a certain harmony in everything. That's just one idea of why certain things are round and not irregular. You may probably want to know why are there asteroids that have some irregular shapes, some that look like potatoes. Maybe we'll talk about that next week. I have my own idea about that. But otherwise there is symmetry, order, beauty, which is what Tiferet in a sense is all about. The Sephirot Tiferet means beauty. When Hashem's Hanagat comes down to this world, resides with us, and conducts everything for us in this world that we live in, what is it called? It's called Shekhinah. That's what we call Shekhinah. It's that aspect of Hashem that resides with us, Shemashgiach Aleinu, that supervises and overlooks over us, and conducts our affairs down here. In this physical realm that's very close to us, that name is present, the Shekhinah. And then we have Elohim, and the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, Elohim meaning din, judgment. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz. The name Elohim signifies judgment, that the world was created with judgment. And then you have the name Yud Hei Vav Hei, which is a very powerful name that we don't even pronounce exactly the way it's spelled, which has more to do with Rachamim. So the rabbis tell us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create the world in the beginning only with Midat Hadin. And then he saw that the world would not last. Ashitech et Midat HaRachamim. He brought in also, as a partner, the attribute of mercy. What's going on over here? Hashem does not change his mind. What this means is as follows. Hashem wanted means there needed to be a world with din. You don't just get good unless you deserve it. There has to be din. So that is the intent, that is the ultimate design. That did not change. What Hashem did do is bring in Rachamim just to modify when necessary the din. So therefore, Rachamim was not created in the very beginning, because Shituf means that it's something that can change. What was created does not change. What Hashem created was the ability to make change. All the Nisim that defied laws of physics, miracles, what's that? That's a change. It's a big change. The ability to make those changes was created in the very beginning. So Hashem is not necessarily breaking the rules. The rules were created. There needs to be din. But Hashem also made the ability, created the ability to make changes when necessary. And that is what Rachamim is all about. That sometimes, and we hope more than sometimes, that Kadosh Baruch Hu should be merachem, should be merciful on us, and should cancel all the terrible decrees against us. The Hashem will continue next week.